So hey guys, welcome back to Ponderings from Palm Coast. I'm Mark Webb, and today I want to do kind of an open forum conversation. There's been so much news and conversations and things, and everybody has an opinion about what's happening here in Palm Coast, Flagler County, and even the rest of the country. So I thought I'd reach out to two very strong-minded individuals that are very passionate, have great ideas. And so I brought in my buddy Mike, the coach, and Jim Manfre. And today, wherever you are, we're just going to kind of throw out some conversations and discuss them, share how we feel, share what's going on, maybe get it off our chest, and maybe open up some dialogue with you and the people that you get exposed to. I don't think people do the water cooler things anymore. But so with that, one of the things that we were just discussing, wanted to bring that up. So recently in Florida, due to a decision by the courts, we are now legal to carry publicly, visibly, a firearm. Open up a great conversation. And Jim, I'll bring it to you first. Coming from the law enforcement side of the house, what are the pros and cons to that decision?
Well, again, it's a lower court decision that's yet to be decided by the Supreme Court, whether these open carry, prohibiting open carry violates the Second Amendment. So we'll see how that works. But I'll tell you from a law enforcement perspective, I know people feel that open carry will somehow protect them, but it's been my experience personally as a sheriff and as a prosecutor and reading the literature that it is extremely rare that a person with a gun, a civilian who does not have training, effectively uses that weapon when it's necessary. And oftentimes it becomes a real hindrance to law enforcement if there is some sort of incident where there is an active shooter going on in a store or on a street, and they arrive and they see people with weapons. They don't know who the good guy and bad guy is. Just because they're shooting at a specific person, the bad guy doesn't have, a scarlet B on their head saying, I'm the bad guy. So you create problems for law enforcement when they arrive on the scene and they see multiple people with weapons. Oftentimes, their first reaction is to shoot that person, depending on what they're doing, or if they inadvertently turn towards the law enforcement. The only time that ever works is that if the person's in front of you and you have no other recourse but to open fire. But I'm not a fan of open carry. I have no problem with concealed carry. I think also what it's going to do, especially in Florida, because there's been a topic of discussion among sheriffs and the legislature and the governors for years, is that we're a tourist industry. People come all over the world to see our attractions. Most of those people, when they come from other countries, and we have a huge international tourist presence here, they are offended by seeing guns openly carried. It's not something they're used to. And the belief has always been is that we are going to turn those international travelers away from Florida and cost us the tourist tax dollars and income that they bring to us. That has been the conversation I've heard for years. So I don't think, I don't know if this law will hold up. I don't think it's good for Florida. I have a weapon, and I do carry it at times if I believe I need to. But it's concealed and nobody knows. And by the way, I've been trained to use it. The other problem simply is people have asked me all the time, should I get a weapon? Because they're afraid of crime in their neighborhoods, or they're, now we're afraid of our this political discourse that we're having that seems to have taken a violent bent. And, my position simply is that if you don't go and shoot a weapon repeatedly, I mean, if you like guns and you like to shoot, that's fine. That makes sense to me. When people ask me, should I buy a weapon, I ask them, do you like bowling? No. Would you buy a bowling ball if you don't bowl regularly?
That's a good point.
You're not going to be able to use it effectively. And it's the same thing in a weapon. It is extremely difficult to shoot a weapon, having done it many times and been shot at and had to draw my weapon to, first of all, accurately shoot somebody. That happens very rarely, even among police officers, even among the military. And it's very difficult when you're in those situations, because the first thing that happens is you get that, that rush of adrenaline, that fight or flight reflex, and you do not have the steadiness that you think you're going to have in those situations. In fact, what I have next to my bed is not my weapon, is hornet spray.
Yep.
Because there has been so many incidents where people wake up in the middle of a dream, they see something, they draw their weapon, they wind up shooting a loved one. So hornet spray sprays 25, 30 feet.
Yeah.
It blinds people, and it is a very effective deterrent if people need to have something next to their bed to make them feel better. But I guarantee you that if you did have an intruder late at night and you had a weapon, the likelihood of, first of all, the intruder sitting there and going, shoot me, is unlikely. People do not stand still in these events. They move. So it is very difficult to shoot a standing target, no less a moving target. So I think this whole gun culture stuff has gotten away from us. I grew up in a family, my dad was a hunter, so I grew up in that era, in that type of atmosphere. I don't suggest it for everybody. I'm not someone who enjoys shooting, but I think we have to stop this. We have to stop. We're going down a rabbit hole that is not in our country's best interest, our own best interest, because, by the way, crime is down dramatically over the past 30 years. Dramatically. We live in a community where there's very little crime, very little violent crime, yet people still feel, not secure in their homes. And now with all the internet, and we have a president who constantly talks in violent terms, it's all, ramped us up a little bit, ramped up that, that feeling that we need to protect ourselves. We need to calm that down. We need to be the opposite of that. You are trained in law enforcement in de-escalation. That's why law enforcement has been so effective. I'm not telling you everyone does it effectively, but every law enforcement officer is trained in de-escalation, and we should embrace those techniques, which means if someone's yelling at you, you speak lower. If someone's being violent, you be defensive. Now, if you have to defend yourself, do what you have to do. But this constant ratcheting up does not, I think, are in our own personal best interest.
Right.
And also our interest in enjoying life. I mean, especially in this city, in this county, mostly retirees. We've all moved here for a better life, for, to relax. We've earned our retirement. I'm sure we all feel that way. And to constantly talk about what the president's saying and what his adherents are saying, or those encourage or espouse violence, is the opposite of what we should be doing. In my opinion, every time I hear that, I pray.
Now, Mike, what do you think?
Well, I tend to see things. I certainly agree with. By the way, Jim is the very best former sheriff we've ever had here in Flagler County. But first, I don't want to see any guns anywhere on people. But I know we're getting deeper into that rabbit hole, and I feel this way. Right now, there is a movement here in Flagler, here in Florida, here in every state in the country. Christian nationalism. There were 100,000 people gathered in Arizona in an arena to pay tribute to a Charlie Kirk, who was not a person that you would want to pay tribute to if you listened to him and even read his words. He was a misogynist, he was a racist, he was xenophobic, he was a cruel man who felt that children's deaths were worth the Second Amendment. So we've got that going. And I think as we have been progressing down that rabbit hole leading to the murder of Charlie Kirk, now, I don't agree with the murder of Charlie Kirk, but I don't agree with Charlie Kirk either. What I think is we are climbing faster and faster downward. Right now in Florida, they just, of course, authorized the open carry of guns. There's no reason to carry guns. Do I want to go in Publix and see somebody packing a 40 caliber Glock with 15 rounds in it, on their belt? We don't know when looking at that person that person's not there to create mayhem, just hasn't started yet. So I know in my Dee and I, my wife Dee and I have vowed that if we walk into any place, I don't care where it is in this country, if somebody's packing a pistol, we are leaving and we're going to tell the manager why we are leaving. But I see a reason why they are loosening up in the red states primarily, and certainly with this administration, on the use of violent weapons. And that is, they are aiming toward, and I believe this, aiming toward a cultural revolution. I believe we are right now in the beginning of what I call a soft civil war, Civil War II. The religious right against everybody else who is not religious. And they're armed, and they're proponents of arming, and they are fans of guns, and they want to show force to intimidate us, either to stop speaking, to stop appearing, to stop something. And I believe that's getting more and more intense, to the point where you get a nut job from a garage or from a building pulling out a rifle and shooting Charlie Kirk. Well, there are going to be more Charlie Kirks, because you cannot control. Once you start down that rabbit hole, particularly within that Christian nationalist bubble, they are so fervent about what they believe, you can't control them. You don't know when one of them is just going to finally crack at a church, in a grocery store, in a government building around the street, and find some reason why they hate the world that day, and they're going to strike out that day. I'll use a couple of examples in my case. I've had some Christian nationalists come after me for speaking about Charlie Kirk. But anyway, they are so over the top, so unhinged, so devoid of any kind of sense of community other than with their own bubble, that one woman actually wrote and said, I threatened her and her daughters or children with death. I did. I've never even heard of this person, but she's accusing me of threatening her and her children with death. One of my posts, for example, on Facebook, grew such outrage from the religious right that a preacher spoke out against it, what I said, and there were 400 comments from the religious right. It was full of hallelujahs, and Jesus is going to come down, and Jesus is the one that, or God is the one that brought Charlie Kirk into the mix to spread the word of God, to avoid Asians, blacks, Jews, gays, whatever, women, of course. And with such religious fervor that I started reading them, and I got through about 100 of the comments, and I was disturbed to the tip of my toes from the top of my head. I was disturbed. And these people are the ones who are promoting the ownership, the visibility of and use of firearms to their ends, because God has called them to do that. So I see Florida's open carry decision as part of that religious fervor going down deeper and deeper and deeper into our community. And then as we are dragged deeper into that rabbit hole. To tell you that I'm uber concerned would not be strong enough.
But I do find it interesting that you are practicing your First Amendment right
Yes.
of free speech to include hate speech, which is a direct reflection on Charlie Kirk. I've been following him for a long time. My
me too.
son turned me on to him probably 3 years ago, because it was a demonstration of how someone, which we now have a president that is starting to fail at this, to be negative, hateful, untrusting, and say terrible things about other cultures and races, but do it softly, do it non-violently, and be able to say what he wants to say, just like you were doing, and yet they defend his right per the First Amendment to do that. Everybody that I've talked to says, well, you know, he's doing his First Amendment. That's great. But then we also have the Second Amendment, which talks about guns and how, wait a minute, you don't have the right to say what you want, and they're going to attack you in whatever media you're on, but we're going to defend the right to have the Second Amendment with your weapons.
See, the
How does that work?
the point I'm making is their argument is not based on law or the Constitution or any other structured way of making a policy decision. It is based on their fervent devotion to their religion, to their God, and to their cause. It's based on the fervency of their emotions. I do want to say one last thing about that, and I want to keep my side of the argument down to guns because that's really disturbing me. I'm incredibly disturbed, but about guns, and about kind of fostering that gun environment. This is not the Wild West. By the way, if anybody thinks it's the Wild West, in Tombstone, Arizona, just prior to the battle of near the OK Corral, Tombstone had an ordinance against the carry of guns in the city, and the gunfight at the OK Corral was started by law enforcement because a road group called the Cowboys were carrying pistols within the city limits, and they were going to arrest them, and that started the fight. So anyway, the argument needs to be against guns, and we have a seminal moment coming up, a existential moment coming up in 2026. We do. If anybody doesn't think it's existential, then they need to talk to me, because it is the upcoming, if we have an election in 2026, and remember, Trump floated yesterday the possibility of calling a national emergency, in which case he could call off elections. But anyway, if there is an election in 2026, it is going to be us versus them. Us being us versus those who would silence us, either by incarceration. They've called for execution of progressives. Execution. They've called for execution of gays. They've called for incarceration of enemies. We are now enemies, so if they don't kill us, they'll incarcerate us. And that, in November of 2026, when that election occurs, should there be an election, we either win and put this behind us, or we lose and we are engulfed now in the full takeover. The Civil War is over and the crazies have won. We have to make our stand at the ballot box in 2026, and we've got to elect people who will say we are getting guns off the street, we are getting guns out of homes, we're going to do it, and you want to fight, then like Jim said, you fight the weaponry of the American Army and Navy and Air Force and Marine Corps and Coast Guard. That's what you're going to fight, and law enforcement. That's what you're going to fight if you want to start something. But in the meantime, you will turn in your guns, because we cannot go down this path in America and have our political decisions and policies made at the end of a Glock pistol. Okay?
Yeah, and I completely agree with everything that Mike is saying. And it's unfortunate we've been here in this country several times before. There's a great book called The Fourth Turning, which sort of anticipated what's happening now. That according to his thesis, every 80 years we go through this tumult. That you can break history going all the way back in American history, European history, Middle Eastern history, whatever culture. There's an 80-year period where there's something occurs and the culture learns from it. So there's a 20-year period. So in this instance, it was World War II. We got through World War II. We overcame autocracy. And we went through that 20-year period from the 40s to the 60s where things were great and we were trying to build up a society and make it better. And then we went through a 20-year period of questioning, the 60s and 70s, about, well, what exactly were we doing? And then there's a 20-year period of reflecting upon those two periods. And then finally there's a 20-year period of some type of interaction that is violent or can be just, just a cultural change. So, and if you go to 80 years before that, it's World War II, it's the Civil War, and it's then, the reaction to all of the result of the Civil War, and then we went through a period of reflection, and then we're back into World War II. And if you go 80 years before that, you start with American Revolution, 20 years of progressivism.
So true.
Then you had Andrew Jackson and his questioning. So, history turns. So history.
Well, is it memory-based, you think? As society forgets?
I think it's a culture. Again, I'm beyond my, my ability to, examine this. I'm just telling you what people smarter than me examine this. All I'm telling you is that, we're all part of this history right now. We're in this period of cultural change, as Mike said. We've been here before. We're here with McCarthy. We're here with the Civil Rights Movement. And in my opinion, I want to be optimistic, is that evil and violence has an end period. Just as Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's what you have to believe in. So we as people who believe in, truly believe in free speech, whether we like what the other party is saying, where we believe in nonviolent interaction, that we will ignore threats, that we will base our reaction on the shoulders of giants before us like Martin Luther King in the face of incredible amount of violence and threats from the government, by the way. It wasn't just, the KKK and that group. It was the FBI, and there was threats. John Lewis, to be on a bridge and know you're going to get the crap beat out of you and stand up for it. That's who I want to be part of. When I want my kids who are in the middle of this. My daughter, as I've said before, is in DC. She was out protesting this past Sunday with her daughter. And basically it's a free DC movement. Because I was in DC when the troops showed up. I honor troops. My son is in the Navy. My dad was in the military. I was in law enforcement. My grandfather was in the military. I have a long history of that. But to use the military in this performative fashion, to degrade them and denigrate them, to instill fear, which is not what their role is, it's defend this country, is a real perversion of our Constitution. And we have to understand it's coming from one place. Even if we went through all of this naturally, it is unnatural to have a president who is a felon, who is a rapist, who is a liar, who is a moron, who's a sociopath. There aren't enough, designations to this man. Rather than trying to bring us together, which other presidents have tried. As much as I did not like Nixon, he still saw his role, even though he had different beliefs, at trying to calm things down. Didn't do a very good job of it. But to have a president who actually believes his role is to instigate and to glorify a guy like Charlie Kirk, who I never heard of before he got shot. And I abhor all violence, those who espouse it, those who encourage it. And it's a tragedy that occurred. But to glorify someone with those type of beliefs who are now, understand what he was saying, is not normal. It's not normal for a president or leaders to do that. And it's interesting, Jasmine Crockett, Congressman Crockett, who I think is our moral voice in the Democratic Party, or just for sane people. I think she's the most articulate, member of Congress in fighting this. She didn't even know that Charlie Kirk had been attacking her. She only heard it since he passed away, that apparently he used her, her as sort of a, to shoot, to just be critical of. But she also said something that was disturbing, that apparently there was a resolution in Congress, honoring Charlie Kirk. And all 58 black members voted against it. Only 2 Caucasian members did not. So, again, I abhor violence. I'm sorry that he was shot. I don't think anyone should be, subject to violence. But for the Congress of the United States to recognize someone whose core beliefs are against everything our founding fathers fought for and generations of servicemen fought for, which is our freedom to disagree. Because that's all this is about right now.
Right.
I don't care what anyone believes. My parents were Republicans, my grandparents were Republicans, and if they were alive today, they probably would believe this stuff. It was the nature of it.
Well, I think you brought up, going back to your cycle of change, if you will, or memory. Just recently, our president has now coined Antifa, anti-fascist group, a terrorist organization. That to me is a clear demonstration of not understanding history or what even fascist is, or how many hundreds of thousands of people died throughout this world, maybe well over 1 million, fighting fascism around this country. And I saw recently a picture of Arlington Cemetery. And over the caption it says, "Was this our first Antifa graveyard?" Because we at our age know, I had family members, I had 2 uncles fought in World War II. We were never touched literally by a fascist, but we saw the world was a bad place, and millions of Americans went across the country, across the ocean, and fought and gave up their lives to fight against fascists. And now we have a president saying, if you did that, you were a terrorist. And that shows, in my mind, that disconnect of understanding, of being able to have the perception of knowing what is. And he's talking to the young people, the 18 to 30-year-olds that probably didn't even know there was a World War II that we fought, or couldn't find Korea on a map. And that's tragic, and that goes to a whole nother aspect. But what I'm trying to do, and my goal locally, is to place the label that our elected officials and those that want to run for office and those that find themselves on the Republican conservative side, and just ask them, do you own those comments? Do you acknowledge? And I literally did that to one of our county Congress people, and cited to them a list of all the things that Charlie Kirk had said, and said, is this who you support? Is this who you are going to run in your next election to say, I believe and agree with everything? And the response came back and says, I don't believe 100% of what everybody says. And that is the trick they use.
Gotcha.
That is the cherry
There's
picking
never a yes or no
they
in there.
use. That individual was at the local event that went on with the candles and everybody talking about the loss of a true tragic loss. I do not support or defend the actions of violence. I don't believe in it. I believe that word and conversations are where we need to be safely to be able to communicate. But then all of a sudden this individual's picture with him there is showing up on potential campaign ads. And so the trick is that you have to look at them and go, if you buy the pie, you can't just eat one slice of it. You've bought the pie. You have to own the whole event. You have to own and understand everything that they say. Just like with the gun thing. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. We don't know what the stress our sheriff's department is going to have when some person sees a guy with a legal weapon on their holster and they're walking into a McDonald's and they're on their cell phone calling the sheriffs going, oh my God, there's an armed guy, he's robbing McDonald's, and 20 sheriffs. And those accidental events is where tragedy occurs, is where an accidental discharge, because they're not trained, they're not exposed. You get an individual that hears or understands something that they don't agree with.
You know, I want to pick up on a comment Jim made. The 80-year cycle, okay? We fought fascism, and we fought authoritarianism and all the evils of both in World War II. And we won. By the way, I should remind everybody, we didn't win alone. It took a village. It took a village to win that. And anyway, it is now 80 years later, almost to the day, and we're going to fight that battle again in 2026. The same battle against fascism. The same battle against not just authoritarianism. If you had a benign figure there, that'd be one thing, but you got a president who is wildly, wildly unhinged. We don't know what he might do next, because we do firmly believe that he is mentally ill. We do firmly believe that he is not making this stuff out his head. Somebody is filling his head with it. And we know the people who are doing it are akin to, close to neo-Nazis, led by Stephen Miller, his buddy. But anyway, we're coming up on 80 years after World War II, the end of World War II. And this election is going to start off another cycle. Either we're going to go in the direction of democracy, go back to the direction of democracy, right? Or we are going to accept authoritarianism, but it is not a benign authoritarianism. It is a leaning toward fascism, which is all power to a political party. No other political parties are allowed. No other dissent is allowed. And within that political party, you have a godlike figure. And if you remember back to your 1930s, Hitler was raised up to be a godlike figure in charge of the world that he conquered, all of Europe, of course. So we're heading for that same direction. And it's all on the line in 2026. If we let it go, if we do what people have done in America forever, which is come out in non-droves in off election years and vote 30% and just give the election to the authoritarians and the neo-fascists, then they've got it. That's how, by the way, Hitler never got more than 36% of the vote of the entire country. And he took over. 36%.
Well, actually, Hitler never ran for office. He was given
his party.
The position.
No.
The Nazi party.
The Nazi
was.
party only
Right.
in
That's
the Reichstag, only the best they did was 36%, but it was enough to make deals, and they took over. So if you look at the MAGA movement, which is roughly 30%, maybe 25% of the country, but it's probably 75 or 80% of the Republican Party. It is. And they're never going to back down. They're never going to become the kind of citizens that we need in this country, that who adheres to law and the Constitution, instead of a godlike figure that wears pancake makeup, paints his face orange, paints his hair orange, and puts orange crap in his office because he is looking like the Sun King. Remember the Sun King? If you're looking back to Louis XIV? That's what he's going for. And so if we allow that to happen in the next election, we have lost for generations, not just for a year or two or three or four or five. We have lost for generations. They will embed themselves. You couldn't dig them out with a cannon or a tank. And that's what we're facing now. And we have choices to make. And people need to understand what those choices are. And the gosh darn Democratic Party, by the way, I'm an NPA. The gosh darn Democratic Party has done a very piss poor job of explaining just what's on the line right now, because we don't have much time. We had a year. That's about it. Either you put it on the line in 2026, or you give up and you either become, as best you can, a fervent fan of the God figure, or you leave the country, or you do whatever you did, as they did in Germany. They made choices, and they immigrated, and they got out, or they became part of the members of the party because no other party were allowed to exist. This is what we're facing. And if anybody doesn't think that's the case, go do your history studies. Overlay that to authoritarianism, the growth of authoritarianism in the world today. The same handbook, the same operational handbook applies to whether it's Russia, whether it's Turkey, Hungary. You'll see the fascist handbook applies, and you can see all the parallels for today. It is happening to America. Germany was a democratic country back in the 20s. Although they did have almost a monarch-like figure, until he left. But anyway, we are now facing that same journey Germans did. They missed their chance. And they put up hell for 11 years from the reign of Hitler. So this is what we're against. Go ahead.
Now, for those of you who like to read, there's Sinclair Lewis wrote a book in 1937 called "It Can't Happen Here," which basically explains what the authoritarianism blueprint is. The first thing you do is you suppress the press. The second thing you do is you find a bogeyman. So that's what Hitler did. First thing he did was suppress the media, went after it, destroyed it. Next thing you do, he made Jews the bogeyman. The next thing he did was say that your safety depends on giving me more power so I can scamp that menace from our society. And you see Trump, who I hear has read Mein Kampf. I don't know how many people have read it. I have. Not willingly. It was a course I had to take. But a lot of those ramblings of Hitler are very similar to the ramblings of Trump, because they are ramblings. There isn't a rational way that you can actually explain to people that you give up your freedoms and I'll make you safe. And
you give up your freedoms and I'll make you free.
Right.
Work makes you free.
Right. Well, and again, book 1984, which is about authoritarianism, made the comment, slavery is freedom. So what they do is they turn your all of the things that you internally want in life, which is freedom, the ability to have your life as you want, and turn it around. And what Benjamin Franklin said is that, to paraphrase him, is that those who would exchange security for freedom don't deserve freedom or security. So that's what's going on here. Trump, all of his language, which is very hypocritical, because he's probably the most violent president we've ever had. He talks in violent terms. He's the one who's trying to convince us that he's the person that will secure us. Meanwhile, crime is down anywhere from 60 to 90% from the 1990s. I know the statistics. I lived them. New York City, which they claim is the root of all evil, crime is down 90%. When I worked in the Bronx in 1980s, there were 2,500 homicides citywide. There were less than 400 last year. Robberies down 90%, rapes, assaults. So crime isn't increasing. And it's incredible to me that law enforcement does not step up when he says that. Because when you criticize DC, New York, Los Angeles for having crime, and again, one crime is too many. You're not criticizing the mayor. He has nothing to do with crime fighting. You're criticizing law enforcement, the police chief, and every single one of those officers who put their lives on the line every day. And you're basically saying you're doing a terrible job because crime is going out of control. I have to say, there wasn't 1 second of any day when I was sheriff or when I was a prosecutor did I call up the mayor or the senator or the president and say, hey, do you think I should prosecute this person? That's not how our system works. So what he's doing is trying to instill fear in us. In a very hypocritical way, he is accusing Democrats and liberals, which, by the way, liberal means free, and liberal used to be a term that we aspired to until Hitler turned that word around. That's where this all started. He turned the word liberal into something demeaning and also something that could be, used against the freedom of the public, which again is turning words around like 1984. Slavery is freedom. That's what he's doing. 67% of all political violence has been done by right-wing persons. 15% has been done by Muslim radicals, 15% by Democrats. Those are the stats. We need to invest our time, and our officials, and by the way, I'm an MPA too, for the very reason that I don't think Democrats, other than people like Jasmine Crockett and a few people, are articulate enough to educate or counteract this hypocrisy that's coming from Trump and his minions. That's what Democrats should be doing every single day. Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer should be countering everything that Trump said that morning, that afternoon, that night, so that you inform the public. Because only about a third of the people really know what's going on every single day. A third of the people have some idea, and a third of the people don't have any idea. And if you don't agree with me, look at our last election. 33% voted for Trump. 32% voted for Harris. There was no blowout win. It may have been an electoral college because of our very silly system that we have. But 40%, 33% did not even show up. When they knew this was a critical election, where we're going to go down one path, as Mike said, or another path. So now we have made that mistake, and 2026 is going to be the litmus test. Who are we as a country? Are we what Donald Trump espouses, or are we what our founding fathers espoused?
So, and it is important, and I try to check myself on this to know when I ponder and I think about the similarities of the past. And I'm a big believer that the past events of our history are very teachable moments to help you make decisions for tomorrow. Because if you don't, that old adage is, if you don't learn from the past, you're bound to repeat it over and over again. So it's important for me personally, I see the similarities of 1930s Germany in today's actions. I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler. I'm not saying that the right are Nazis. I'm just reflecting on an observation that actions mean huge events when the media is attacked, when newspapers are sued, when threats are made to political allies. If you don't vote for me, I'm going to primary you. Also, the check and balances of the past, and I know Jim had brought up Nixon. That's an interesting part in our time because Nixon, a Republican, was put in check at the end by his own party. Senators went to him at the 11th hour and said, "We don't have your back. What you're doing is wrong." That check and balance of how the founders had developed our Constitution worked, and he stepped down. Nobody knows if those checks and balances are going to hold. Our legal system is like molasses. And I was talking to somebody the other day, say it's amazing how the Trump administration, can do an EO and say, effective today, we're changing this, birthright citizenship, for example. But it takes 5 months for that action to get in front of the Supreme Court to find out it's good or bad. Well, it's already been effective. It's already happened. But I want to believe, even at our own city council level, even at our Flagler County Commissioner level, that consequences, comments mean things. And that's where, and I agree with you both, and I participate as much as possible to share truth, to inform the public, to let them know the only voice they have is at election day, to get out there and to understand. I was recently exposed to a situation where somebody I know went to a Republican meeting and was able to sit in on it and found out they were pushing mail-in ballots at the REC monthly meetings.
They typically,
which is against.
They typically outvote us, both in person, and they were the original ones that did most of the mail-in voting.
But it is ironic that publicly the Trump administration and Trump is saying, stop, don't, we want everybody to do it. And yet locally, because they know, they believe, they feel it, that there's a chance for a swing. There's a chance for a turnaround, because I'm being exposed to people that were Republicans and now are MPAs, or even made the bigger jump. Talked to a gentleman on Saturday. I was a Republican. I can't do it anymore. I've registered Democrat because of our closed primary, is why he went ahead and jumped all the way over, which is a whole nother thing that Nikki Freeze is talking about opening up within the Democratic Party. So it's all about educating. It's all about information. And it's all about the time to sit on the couch and not know what's going on and not pay attention.
I need to make a point about the Constitution. You know, Dee Dee and I went to a program at the library, and it was about it was a lawyer who was a student of the Constitution, been lecturing for years on the Constitution, and you come to realize this: the Constitution of the United States is not locked into concrete. There is no divine authority that holds everybody to the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution of the United States is essentially an agreement to agree. Okay, that's what it is. It's an agreement. We all agree we'll live by this, but there's nothing that can make us live by this if we choose not to. And that's where we are today. We are today at the point where almost half the country has decided that the Constitution doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for them. And so they want to abrogate the Constitution by following a MAGA movement that seems to satisfy whatever it is they need. And I understand that, because there's no enforcement mechanism except the separation of powers. But if the other two powers, like the Congress and the judiciary, do not choose to do their jobs and check the executive branch, then the Constitution is useless, because there's no other mechanism for doing it. And right now we have a judiciary and a Congress and an executive branch all being driven by one person sitting on a golden throne. That's his bathroom, by the way. Sitting on a golden throne and making the decisions. And there is no check, no balance, no consequences, no anything. He does exactly what he pleases. So right now he is akin to a dictator. And the reason why is partly what Mark just said. I asked that lawyer, well, you know, the Constitution, it doesn't have an enforcement means other than checks and balances. If everybody agrees not to do that, then you don't have a Constitution. Why bother? And he said, well, yes, you do. You got your vote. Yeah, we're a year away, and since Trump got elected, we were 2 years away from getting a vote to try to stop him. It's too late. He's done what he's done. And in 2 years more on top of this year, this coming year, he'll have 4 years in to completely usurp the authorities of the other two branches of government, completely embed a culture within America with his thugs in charge, where there is no Constitution, because there's nothing on this earth and there's nothing divine that's going to enforce the U.S. Constitution. And we let one man do this because of the dissatisfaction of a whole bunch of people who, for some reason, don't want to move into the 21st century. They would prefer to go back to the early part of the 18th or 17th centuries, where things were a lot easier. Everybody knew their place, and we didn't have to share anything with anybody. and we didn't pay taxes in that form. We paid, other taxes. We didn't pay income taxes. But anyway, they want to go back to a life where I have my house, I work for it. I was a cop in New York or something like that. I come down the Palm Coast, I have my house. I don't want to be bothered by anybody. I don't want anybody sharing my money. I don't want to pay for sidewalks in front of my house because I don't use them. I don't want to pay for canals because I don't use them. I don't want to pay for trees because I don't like them. They want to live and be left alone, and that is what Trump is giving them. He'll make the decisions for all of us, and there's a segment of our country who is perfectly happy with that. Perfectly happy. And this is going to be tough, but we've got to overcome that. And that's about all I've got to say on the subject.
I'll just, real quickly, a quick history lesson is that, throughout history, there were very few democracies. Obviously, there was Greek democracy, there was a Roman republic, but most of our history has been governed by kings and autocrats. In the 13th to 15th, 16th century, a group of political theorists came up with this idea of a social compact. That rather than the king telling us what to do and the king providing us services, that we collectively could do that. And it took root in British law with the jury system, which is an English creation, with a parliament, which was a check for the king. And that came to our country. And all of the, our founding fathers and the original settlers here, who were a mix of British and Dutch and German in different groups, said, you know what? We like this idea of rather than being ruled by a specific person, we are going to get together and for the good of the community. It was Benjamin Franklin who came up with the idea of the post office. Why don't we collectively get together and make sure our letters are distributed? He came up with the idea of a fire department. Why don't we collectively as a community create a fire department? He came up with this idea, which was not implemented here, it was first implemented in Britain, where law enforcement was done on a local level, not by the military. Because all these functions were military functions prior to this idea of we can do it collectively. And then the idea of public education. Not just, the government tells us who can get educated, but we as a community are going to educate our people. We as a community are going to build roads. We as a community are going to decide our local fates. So that's been that has been the arc of our country, is make things more local. We know best at a local level what we need. Now, the Republican Party, among a lot of their hypocrisy, they were the forebears of the Republican Party, were for something called the Articles of Confederation, which was a loose knit of government where the states basically had their run of the will. And then they realized that was not unworkable, that you had to have common laws. And they created the Constitution. The Constitution was a reflection that you had to have some agreements among peoples about how we want to be governed. And that's how the Constitution came about. And yes, it's guardrails. It's not the whole thing, it's guardrails. It's saying within this area, this is what the laws we're setting up, and we set up these other branches to monitor, the laws and the aspirations of that document. But the Republican Party through the years have been for states' rights when they don't like what the federal government is doing, Civil War, right? States' rights when Democrats are in office. But now that they have a Republican pseudo-autocrat, now it's all about federalizing things. Federalizing abortion rights, federalizing gun rights, which, by the way, gun rights were always a local issue. Each state governed it. The Second Amendment did not deal with gun rights. It dealt with the ability of states to have militias to fight off local uprisings. That's what it was all about. But that doesn't mean there weren't gun rights before. Every state had their own gun rules and regulations based on where they were. If your rural community had one, if your city had another. But they federalized those rights. So it's a hypocrisy, is that they want to gain power, federal power, whenever they're in office, but they're all for states' rights when Democrats are in.
I totally agree with you, and I find it hilarious when I go into our local meetings and they're constantly complaining about local control being taken away by the Republican elected supermajority, which is sitting in Tallahassee, which could take away something as crazy as your property taxes and e-bike control and development rules, and it's on and on and on of how Tallahassee, which are Republican super majorities, which we've voted for, are taking away the power of our local Palm Coast and Flagler County controls. So these are all great talking points. It's always great to have you guys. And passion.
It's good to get some things out on
Well,
the
and
table.
it's important to be passionate. And that's what this is. That's the time we're in now. You're not going to sit on the sidelines, as Mike is saying, come November 15th, November 40th, after the next election, and go, wow, I should have done more. I should have voted. I should have participated. I should have been heard. Because like what Jim said, ultimately in the structure of our Constitution, the very first 3 words are, we the people. So we have to own this. You guys need to know and how to find out where to get active, where to be passionate, and find your neighbors, find your friends, find those people that may not think like you do, and have a safe, open dialogue and conversation. And just ask each other, do you really believe in this issue or that issue? And have that conversation. And I like to start with this opening comment. It doesn't matter how you feel, what you look like, how you got here. We're all Americans. We are all in the same boat. We're going to sink together. Right now, we're rowing in a circle because the right's going one way, the left's going anyway. And if you've ever been on a rowboat, you just spin. So guys, with that, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this passionate conversation. Remember, like and subscribe and share this with others. The conversation is just starting. Thanks a lot.